Hello, I'm Richard Allen Cohen. I used to live and work in the city. Now I live a few miles from here, and this is where I work, along the paths and streams in the beautiful forests of Northwest Connecticut. I'm a conceptual photographer who creates grand imaginary landscapes out of small-scale natural elements like mossy rocks, streams, waterfalls, and decayed tree stumps. To show you what I mean by that, in this 12-minute video, I'd like to tell you about why I create these landscapes, as well as to go deeper into how waterfall images in two of my recent portfolios were made.
I've been interested in landscapes since I was a small child, and drew and painted them as a teenager. When I started in photography seriously about 10 years ago, I was drawn to both outdoor landscapes as well as to constructing interior landscapes composed from images made through store windows. I now create landscapes that consist of imagined mountains, forests, fields, and horizons. As is evident from this composite on my home page, I make both abstract and realistic landscape images. I've found abstract landscape forms in many places that include the weathered sides of boat hulls in my Waterline series, one of which is shown here, and the beautiful forms and colors found on Mexican agave plants, one of which is shown here. I'm also interested in using realistic elements of the landscape in imaginary or constructed images, such as this image, which was composited from multiple photographs of a mossy tree stump. In this video, I'd first like to explain my purpose in imagining and creating images of waterfall landscapes in which the viewer's perspective is altered so that the landscapes appear much grander than they actually are. Secondly, I hope to enable viewers to understand the appearance of the images, which of course is paramount, but also to provide insights into the artistic thinking and concepts behind the images. Thirdly, I will explain the technical aspects of creating these images to share those methods with other photographers, several of whom have asked me about the techniques involved. But before I get to the technical aspects, I'd like to show you some of the images in my Climate Falls and Planet Falls portfolios. As you look through them, I hope they will raise the question of why I have made these images in this way. First, I believe that viewing landscape art should invite the viewer to see new and unfamiliar places, as well as to remind them of landscapes that they have seen before. Secondly, compared with my abstract landscape images, these realistic landscapes provide the viewer with more starting information about the landscape being presented, but they too call on the viewer to imagine aspects about this landscape. Where are we? What's the reason for the strange skies and stars? What's going on with the scale of the landscape? Are these little streams or huge waterfalls? My purpose in making these particular images appear realistic is to offer the possibility to the viewer that they are real places. This is because I wish to convey the beauty of nature in an idealized form. In many ways, this is my personal response to the challenges of climate change that are affecting the environment and therefore the landscape. I hope that imagining an idealized landscape will stimulate myself and others to protect the environment. I'm creating the appearance of a new reality, if you will, to imagine a future when the landscape is preserved. In these images, I do this in two ways. First, all of these images are clearly not the reality we see when we hike outdoors. They have starry skies taken from the Hubble Space Telescope, as well as smoke, clouds, and mist that I have photographed and put into the images to provide an imaginary atmosphere surrounding the landscape. These make it obvious that they are not photographs of real places. Secondly, unlike most photographs, I have created the images in a way that they appear hyperrealistic, both in perspective and in detail. I have acquired the images by panning across a relatively small-scale intimate landscape in a way that provides the image with a unique perspective, making the landscape appear much grander than its real scale would otherwise appear. In addition, I have used a technique called focus stacking in order to create an image that is in focus in the foreground, mid-range, and background, which makes these imagined landscapes more realistic, inviting the viewer to enter. This last image is the one that I've chosen to demonstrate how these images are produced. There are 3 stages in image development that I will talk about here. First, I will tell you about aspects of image acquisition in the field, using focus stacking to make frames that are later stitched into the completed panorama. Second, I'll briefly show you the steps I used during post-processing in Photoshop, used to merge the photo stacks and to stitch the panorama. And third, I will show you compositing techniques to improve upon the waterfall texture, to give it a sense of movement, and to create and merge the background textures and skies. Finally, I also should mention what I'm not going to include in this video, and that is anything about improvements in light, contrast, color, and sharpening, all routine Photoshop techniques that I have used to create the final image. To give you a better idea, this is the Photoshop file of the image we're going to look at. After the entire image is processed, the Photoshop file had in this case in excess of 20 layers that are shown at the right. I'll be showing you only what goes into making the 2 layers in the Photoshop file shown highlighted in light gray in the layer stack on the right. I'll begin by showing you how I approach making the image in the field. To get the perspective that I'm looking for in these images requires getting down low in the water, wearing boots and waders. I'll often begin with my phone, trying out different angles and heights, obtaining images like this one. Then I'll set up my camera and tripod, and using Live Viewer on the camera's LCD, pan across the image, assuring that I am framing the panorama properly. When I acquired the image that I'm going to discuss further, I took a single horizontal frame more or less conventionally at small aperture, blurring the waterfall because of the prolonged time of exposure. To acquire the final image, I've turned my camera on its side. I've then taken multiple images focusing on prominent features in the frame, in the background, in the midground, and in the foreground, that will later be merged into one focus stack. Then I pan across the field in overlapping frames, and in each one repeat the process of focusing on features throughout that frame. In this way, I'll acquire 30 to 50 images in the whole panorama of 4 to 5 individual frames. Then, in post-production in Photoshop, I'll open each photo stack, in this case 8 images, and using auto alignment and auto blending tools, I merge the images into one frame shown here. You can see that all areas of the merged stack are in focus, unlike the remaining image in the background. I do the same with the other stacks, creating overlapping focus frames like this. Then, these 4 merge frames are stitched in Photoshop, shown here. Finally, this stitched image was cropped along the dotted line into the final panorama. As I mentioned before, I often increase the texture of the waterfall in order to enhance the appearance of flowing water and give the impression of a grand waterfall. In order to do this, in the field I take another panorama of the flowing water at a much shorter exposure, usually between 1/50th and 1/20th of a second, shown here. This image was also created from 4 vertical frames that were focus stacked on the water itself. Then in Photoshop, using a mask, I blend the desired amount of texture of the water into the image of the blurred water and get a final result shown here. In a final step, I add to the image the textures and colors in the environment and background. In these series, I have often used high-resolution Hubble Space Telescope images or photographs of skies, smoke, and mist, altering their color and contrast freely to suit the waterfall image. This is one such Hubble image shown at reduced opacity overlying the waterfall image. I then create a mask, shown here, and paint in the areas that I desire to appear in the image while masking out those that I don't. The white portions of the mask then apply only those areas of the Hubble image to the composited final image, shown here. Lastly, I believe that a photographic print is an important tool to work through the final stages of post-processing of an image, but also to present the final image in a format suitable for hanging on the wall. I've printed the images in Climate Falls and Planet Falls on Canson high-gloss photo paper. They are then encased between a Sintra backing and a veneer of clear plexiglass called an acrylic float mount. The process of making the images that I've shown you allows for a high-resolution print. This is an example of a 24 by 48 inch image in the Planet Falls series mounted in this way. The acrylic mount preserves a clear view into the landscape, just as through a window would. An additional border frame can be added for hanging if you desire, but I hope you'll agree that the acrylic mount looks fantastic just as it is.
Thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that it has given you a greater appreciation of the how and why of the images that I make. If you have any questions about what I've shown you, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. If you have an interest in looking at or purchasing prints, I'm happy to discuss the details and send you price lists. You can reach me via the contact information on my website, richardallencohen.com. Thank you again.